It was a difficult beginning for two mule deer fawns in Saskatoon. Their mother was hit by a car at a busy Saskatoon intersection during rush hour traffic. They were born premature and orphans and likely wouldn't have survived if it weren't for a whole lot of human help. And that's where Jan Shattuck intersects with this story. She runs Living Sky Wildlife Rehabilitation in Saskatoon and joins me now. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat today, Jan.
Thank you for having me.
Jan, take us back to that day. What happened when you got to the scene?
Well, the police were there, and there was a car being towed away, and I actually started to go after the car, and the police called me back and said, no, it's over here. And they had covered up the little fawn with a blanket to keep it warm, which was really nice. And so it was it was still wet because it was still covered in the amniotic sac. And so I took my blanket out and wrapped it up in my blanket and gently transferred it to my vehicle, and I was headed back to the rehab center when the police called me back to the scene saying that they had actually found a second fawn in the bushes. They just heard a little bit of a rustle and they went to check it out, thankfully. And this particular fawn was covered in ants because it had been sitting there for a while. And so they brushed all the ants off and things like that, and I took that one as well and took them back to the center where we then had to be mom, which was really interesting because I had to sort of think back to what is it that a deer mom would do, and she would lick off that amniotic sac and dry off her babies. So I used a towel and we rubbed and towel dried the little babies and watched them get more frisky and trying to stand up on those little tiny legs. They were absolutely just tiny, and it was really interesting to be able to see that the base of the feet, which in a normal deer is black, but when they're first born, they're actually white.
It's interesting. So when you got the fawns back, you mentioned, I mean, they're of course premature and needing help, but were they injured at all or were they okay?
There was one that had been injured in the impact, and so we had to take it down to Forest Grove Veterinary Clinic where she was able to stitch up the hind end and put some antibiotics in there.
So what did you end up doing to release these fawns? Because of course they can't live with you forever. What happened next?
Well, we had to work with the Provincial Society, WRSOS, and one of the directors, Bonnie Dell, who is an amazing volunteer and was willing to take these deer out 3 nights in a row. With the help of our conservation officer. She took them out to different locations in the province around Saskatoon, where we have our chronic wasting disease zone, if you will. And they didn't find any mule deer on the first 2 nights, and so thankfully it was magical. Number 3, on the 3rd night they found some mule deer on some private land, and so the gentleman who lived there was able to stay and watch the situation. When they called in the mother deer, she comes in just snorting and really quite protective, because what we do is we play the distress call of a young fawn, and she assumes that her fawn is in distress, and so she comes in to protect her baby. And here she found these other 2 orphaned babies. But because she thankfully assumed that they were hers, she took them in as hers, and later on the gentleman said that the young were gone and they were gone with her. So we're really fortunate, because otherwise those 2 fawns would have had to be euthanized.
Why would the time constraint be so important? Why is that 3rd night kind of the end time?
The 3 days is very important because fawns socialize extremely well to people. They're very friendly at the beginning there. We needed to be able to get them back out there with a deer mom before they started to think that we humans were their parents. When we would come with the milk bottles, they were starting to get quite anticipatory, and so when they would see us, they would get excited, thinking that we were kind of their mom, but we weren't, obviously, and so we needed to be able to get them back out there so that they realized that a deer is actually their mom.
Well, a happy ending to the story. We're glad that you were there to help them out. Thank you so much for joining me and telling the story for us today.
Thank you very much for having us.